Hey, Tyson here from Refuge Church in Lenoir City, Tennessee. Thank you for listening to our message today. Refuge Church is a family of faith sent to proclaim hope in Jesus Christ through relationships. For more resources and information about Refuge, please visit us on the web at refugeph.com.
All right, Refuge, we are back this week doing a special edition of the podcast, doing a church-wide devotional. This week, Ty challenged the church body to go through a 5-day devotional together titled Focus. If you would like to be part of this series, you can sign up for the Realm Church app for notifications and add Refuge Church Pleasant Hill as your home church in the YouVersion Bible app. So what I want to do in this podcast is to review each day's point of focus, and I want to give you a challenge at the end of this podcast on how you can apply this devotional to your life. So let's kick it off with day 1, the undetected sacredness of circumstances, looking in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. What we learned here was that in all things, all aspects, all situations, and circumstances of a believer's life are ordained by God. When we are following Jesus, there is no such thing as a coincidence. God has placed you in every time and place and moment for the purpose of spiritual growth and for furthering the gospel of Christ. Even when you don't understand, the Spirit understands. So what should we do then? We should not trust in ourselves, but we should trust that the Spirit will guide us. One of the biggest challenges we have as believers is to let go and let God, to put our faith in God in all things, not just the most difficult moment of our lives, but every single moment of our life. When we are pursuing God, it's so easy to think of each situation as a mission, and we want to complete the mission as fast and as efficient as possible to show God how much we love Him. But that's often the wrong way to go about it, because when we do this, we are taking the focus off of what God can do in us and through us, and we're placing the focus on what we can do ourselves. Or on the inverse of things, we cut God out of the small moments of our lives, thinking that they don't matter, that they're not important, or that God can't use us even in the little things. So it's incredibly important to recognize our present circumstances and what God can do through them. As we build into day 2, it is titled, Where the Battle is Won or Lost, coming from Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 1. We're seeing a shift from the external things, from the circumstances around us, to internal things, looking at how God works most powerfully through us when we are alone with Him. It says that our battles are first won or lost in our secret place among God's presence, not out in the presence of the world, not in the middle of those circumstances. Our battle is lost first in our heart. Building upon day 1, seeing how all of these circumstances of our life are ordained by God, we can conclude that the only way we will live up to these circumstances, to live up to the gospel, is if we first do the work in ourselves and do it in private first. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, it looks like this. It looks like taking your fears, your anxiety, your laziness, your sin, whatever the struggle, whatever the resistance you have to God's will, and place it before God. Deal with it head on, and don't stop until it's finished. Sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes it feels like we're wrestling with ourselves, or maybe we feel like we're even wrestling with God, but it is extremely, extremely important that we take this time to work through these things, work through them with God, to work through them in private, or we will surely fail to live up to the gospel out in the world, out in public. Carrying on further in day 3, the title is Obedience or Independence, coming from John 14:15. Building further, looking at the internal and the external. Now we're starting to look at obedience, but maybe not in the way you think. God does not intend to force our obedience to Him, but rather He wants to draw us so deep into Himself, so deep into the Spirit, that our spirit, our soul becomes one with Him. And in return of this, when our spirit is close to God, obedience comes naturally from that, because our hearts become more like Christ. We begin to outflow Christ through ourselves. I could put this in relation to me and my wife, if I did something nice for her just because I thought I had to, or because I thought she would be mad at me if I didn't, or because I wanted something from her in return, could I tell her that that was an act of love? Absolutely not. But on the inverse, because I love her, I show her my love through my actions. It's a sacrificial love. It's a love without hesitation. I desire to give myself fully to her. This is how God intends us to be towards Him in regards to obedience. We should be drawn so close to Him that we want to give ourselves fully to Him, to sacrifice ourselves to Him without hesitation, without regard to our own desires. When Christ spoke those words, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments," this isn't a threat. It isn't a demand in terms of do this or you will be punished, but it is a reminder that our actions will show whether or not our hearts are in love with God. If we love God, we will keep His commandments without even thinking about it. We will be so in line with God that everything else, all of the obedience, all of the willfulness to go, to do the work in private, to do the work in public, to live up to these circumstances that God lays before us, it all comes naturally. And this is where day 4 becomes incredibly important. It comes from Isaiah chapter 52, verse 12. There's a sentence in this day 4 devotional that really struck out to me that says, "Our present enjoyment of God's grace tends to be lessened by the memory of yesterday's sins and blunders." Our present enjoyment of God's grace tends to be lessened by the memory of yesterday. Think about this for a second. We've gone from this external influence to the internal influence to the nature of our heart, and now we're seeing the culmination of past and present collide. How easy is it for us to dwell on the past, to dwell on our mistakes, to dwell on our hurt, and allow those things to rob us of being in the present? But I want you to understand that it does not have to be this way. This day 4 devotional reminds us that our God is a God of yesterdays, and these things can serve to drive us towards God, further towards God. Pain, hurt, anguish, regret, all of these things can be motivators to push us towards God. Going back to the idea of facing these issues head on, we should not run from our past. We should not hide from our past. We should not dwell on our past, but we should face the past and use it as motivation for our own spiritual growth. All of us have made mistakes, but we cannot dwell on them. Instead, we should take a moment as you're listening to this podcast or as you are reading this devotional, take a moment to reflect on how far God has brought you, on how God has delivered you right now to where you are. And in that, we should be excited. We should feel secure in what God holds for us tomorrow and in the future. We have a God who promises to go both before us and to come after us in order to protect us. We are never alone in our circumstances. We're never alone in our battles in private. We're never alone because God is with us. We can let the past die, and we can look towards the future with open arms, again, ready to pursue God and all of the ordained circumstances that God has put before us as they come. And now finally, as we go into day 5, fellowship in the gospel, looking at 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 2. As we reach the finale of this series, we start to evaluate our purpose in life. Or better yet, we begin to evaluate our God-given purpose in life. As Christ followers, in our loving pursuit of God, we are called to deny ourselves and to follow Him. Quite literally, surrendering ourselves to God, trusting Him to provide the circumstances, to take us, to deliver us where we need to go so that God can use us most effectively to show His love to the world. This is the hardest part of being a believer, in my opinion. Letting go of the world, letting go of our desires, letting go of our ambitions, and allowing God to move through us. God sent His Son Jesus Christ for the purpose of salvation to all, to bring salvation to all. Why would we be so naive to think that God's desire to save us is to allow us to live a life according to the world, chasing worldly things, chasing our own desires? That is absolutely crazy. We understand that God has a unique purpose for each and every one of us, filled with good works, that we should walk in them, that we would allow God to do incredible things through us, through our willingness to be obedient, out of our love for God. The greatest sin a believer can commit is to say to God, no, I'm doing this my way. Because in doing that, not only are we robbing ourselves of God's blessing, but we are robbing those around us who God intends to reach through his disciples. This sounds extreme to think that we would ever say no to God as believers, but really we do it all the time, and we usually do it in small ways that we think won't matter, but I promise you they do. We should commit ourselves to be in accordance with God's will, to be obedient to God's will, to have fellowship in the gospel in every moment and aspect of our life in accordance to God's grace. And we should really strive to live that out. So here's my challenge for you as we close out this podcast. I want you to recognize that each day is an opportunity to trust in God, to grow more like Christ, and to share the love of Jesus to those around you. Stop trying to show God how much you can do. Stop trying to tell God how much you can't do, and just allow God to work naturally through you. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed this message.
Thank you for listening to this message today, brought to you by Refuge Church. Please visit our website for more resources, as well as our YouTube channel. Just search for Refuge Church in Lenore City, Tennessee to find us. We hope that this message has helped you find hope in Jesus Christ.